All right, hello. Hello and welcome. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Huckleberry Youth Program's conversation with Dr. Madeline Levine, Adolescent Mental Health During COVID. I'm Dr. Douglas Stiles, the Executive Director of Huckleberry Youth Programs, and I'll be facilitating the conversation with Huckleberry's Clinical Director, Heidi Wells.
Happy to be here with you all.
For over 50 years, Huckleberry Youth Programs has partnered with Bay Area teens and families to educate, inspire, and support young people with programs focusing on safety, health, justice, and education. A large portion of our support comes through community partners like you. So please consider joining the Huckleberry family by making a 100% taxable donation so that we may continue to provide mental health support to Bay Area youth and families. Tonight, we are so pleased to talk about a very important topic with one of the leading thinkers in addressing adolescent well-being, Dr. Madeline Levine. Dr. Levine is a psychologist with 40 years of experience as a clinician, consultant, educator, and author. Her New York Times bestseller, The Price of Privilege and Teach Your Children Well, explored teenagers and how they're experiencing epidemic rates of emotional problems, and how our current narrow definition of success unnecessarily stresses academically talented kids and marginalizes many of those whose talents and interests are less amenable to measurement. Madeline, welcome and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Doug.
So tonight we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the world, but mostly focus on youth and their families and have a conversation about the mental health impact of those things. But before we dive in, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about your newest book, Ready or Not, Preparing Our Kids to Thrive in an Uncertain and Rapidly Changing World.
Thank you. I happen to have it right here, Ready or Not. And I didn't know the pandemic was coming. So this book came out 2 weeks before lockdown here in California. And no, I wasn't prescient. I had no idea. But what was clear was that there were radical changes in technology, in what businesses were looking for, in jobs. The world was changing very, very quickly. And the skill set which had served kids well a long time ago, because it really hasn't served kids well for quite some time, was really expired. It was just over. And I co-founded something called Challenge Success at Stanford's Graduate School of Education 15 years ago. And we've been trying to change the paradigm of education. And frankly, the reason I wrote that book was, well, we ran around the country for 15 years. Lots of us, kids should sleep, they shouldn't have so many AP classes, it's not where you go to college. Individually, we help people, but there was no collective shift. So even before this started, the kinds of resilience tools and adaptability were really missing from kids, because developmentally they were spending all their time, trying to get straight A's and be popular and be on social media, and not developing the kinds of strengths they needed even then and more than ever need now. That's the genesis of it.
So now we're in a very different time. I know in maybe chapter 1 or 2, but you talk about, there's a lot of stress in parents. So this was a year ago, but it's not World War I, it's not World War II, it's not the flu of 1918, it's not the upheaval of the 60s. But now a year later, that is going on. We not only have a pandemic, we've got racial unrest, and we've got smoke in the air if you're here in California. We've got all kinds of things that really are making families stressed that are happening to all of us in the world. Have your views changed, or does some of this still stick or not? What do you think?
And I have to throw in a dysfunctional leadership, because that has a great deal to do with what's going on all of these fronts. Has it what I think is different about this than other times is that 2 things. One, therapists, clinicians we're all experiencing the exact same thing as our clients and patients are experiencing. And I don't know that that's happened before. That's one thing. And the other thing that I think is really notable, you know, I have right here on my desk, it says, you're being asked to sit on the couch while your grandfather went to war, right? That I put that up like the first month. It doesn't ring so true to me anymore because we're isolated. And before, in these great national tragedies, you know, you think of 9/11 or you think of a war, there was a sense of community and everybody is saying we're all in this together. I don't think it feels really like we're all in this together. I think people feel incredibly isolated, and many people are isolated. You know, during World War II, you had a victory garden, or my mother used to have what's called a pushki on the kitchen counter where you put change in and it went to Israel. There was some sense of real collaboration, and because we're not eyeball to eyeball and not leaving our houses in many cases, I think it's unusual in that respect and more stressful in some ways.
Agree.
So the classic thinking of adolescence is this period of identity formation, kind of like the getting to adulthood, but it's also this time of risk taking. I think there's been a lot of commentary in the last decade around is that actually all adolescence is, but I think that in a lot of your writing, you really focus on those two things as being key in parents' understanding of the adolescent process, and not forgetting that risk taking is a learning process. And identity development comes out of what they learn in that process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, you know, anybody who's doing clinical work now is overwhelmed with parents calling and saying, my teenager's going out, my teenager's smoking dope, my teenager won't respect the rules. And the reality is, for teenagers in particular, I think this is incredibly difficult. And I think we have to be compassionate about that because their brains are not wired to be sitting home with mom and dad. Their brains are wired to be out and taking hopefully healthy risks. And they can't do a lot of that right now. But there's another part of adolescence. You're right. I've always focused on that. And I think it's in regular times a very important part of development. But I think the other part of adolescent development is the kind of, I can feel it in my body. You know how teenagers are. They're like, they move around, they want to do stuff, they get indignant about things, they've got aggression. And I feel really strongly, why don't we harness some of that and put teenagers to work in positions of service that help the community and help, you know, you're more help being the helper than the person who's helped. And I think I just started a program at Jewish Family and Children's Service, actually, hooking up kids. So many kids are out of work, out of school, right? They don't know what to do with themselves. So I think it's a really good time to take the other parts of adolescence, which love social issues, which love environmental issues, and say, okay, go do something. And their need to be in groups. The other thing about their need to be in groups is we can't just say, no, 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 no. You just can't do that with a teenager. You can't go out, you can't do this, you can't do that. I think we have to do some brainstorming with them around actually what they can do. And I think parents need to be clear. I think boundaries are really important about not jeopardizing people's health. But I think it needs to be, like most things with teenagers, a collaboration. Teenagers are smart. And nobody ever believes me when I say, you know, a teenager actually thinks as well as all three of us. Of course, it sure doesn't seem that way, but their cognitive capacity actually is the same. So, you know, harness some of that, bring them into the conversation. And I think that the area of service helps give kids some, I think there's a deficit of meaning this time. Like, you know, what are we doing and what can I do? And I have no idea what my life will be like. It's just a deficit of what's my purpose. I think we have to extend some opportunities for purpose to kids.
Well, I think one of the things that attracts me to working with adolescents is that that energy that you're kind of talking about, that creative spark, that, yeah, that, you know, you
Right.
body kind of thing. And, you know, so much comes out of all of us between those ages, you know, up until 25 or so. And then, you know, the rest is downhill, as they say.
Get tired.
Yeah, but there's so much creativity, there's so much engagement, there's so much drive, there's so much desire to be engaged in the world in a way. And I think what you're kind of talking about is how do we harness that in a way, as opposed to overstructuring people? How do we build creativity and learning into young people's lives?
Right. And it was so clear before this happened. You know, in my book, I'm talking with the heads of Google and LinkedIn and Morgan Stanley and the military. It was so clear in corporate world and in the military that a new kind of creativity and enthusiasm and resilience and, you know, make a mistake and pop up again were needed. And we were ignoring that. You know, we were too focused on the end product and not on the process. So from my point of view, if nothing changes when this ends, God knows when that is, but if it will have been the waste of a pandemic, because it's a pause and reset now. Let's rethink some of these things that we know benefit kids and adults in life and are more important than, you know, the banner that's hanging on your wall. We had that all backwards.
So now we are in the middle of many challenges that are not just affecting young people, but are affecting adults as well. I mean, the serious challenges, people are losing their jobs, people are in very challenging, we look at the hurricanes that are on the news today, people that are losing their homes and their livelihoods, and the fires that are happening in California, and then the social unrest that's kind of there as well. So parents are stressed for legitimate reasons. It's not just, oh, I'm worried that, you know, my kid's going to do something bad or hang out with the wrong crowd. It's an existential worry that's happening across many families. Has that changed your thinking in terms of some of this, or because of the pandemic, because of the what's going on?
Yeah, it certainly has changed, hopefully, everybody's feelings about equity and wages and economic opportunity and those kinds of things. This may be an unpopular thing to say, but yeah, I'm old enough, I get to say what I want. I am not worried about your kids, or my kids are all grown, but I'm not worried about the people in my neighborhood here in Pacific Heights at all. Those kids will, for the most part, manage through this and come out of it. They lost a few months, or they lost a year. They didn't socialize as much. They have so many other things, so many other supports going for them. I really do believe that unless they had a serious mental health issue before, that most of those kids will do fine. The reality is that the kids who don't have resources, haven't had resource, parents have to go out and work. They're frontline workers, they're exposed, their families are exposed, their Wi-Fi is not very good. Those are the kids I think we really need to worry about, because they're falling further behind. It may be a gap that's not capable of being closed. And I think the other thing that it points out is how terrible mental health services are, how small. I spent, and this true story from today, I had to find a psychiatrist in the South for a client. It took me 3 hours to find a qualified mental health professional in this part of Arkansas. And that's not so unusual anymore. So the fact that we have devoted so much time and resource into tutors and SAT prep scores and college, donating to college, and like this to mental health. And I think everybody is in accord that at the end of this, we're going to have a mental health crisis, because Journal of the American Medical Association, like 3 days ago, said that the rate of depression is up 300%. 300%.
That's amazing.
We weren't handling it when it was 300% less. So I think it's just an idea. Starting to think about training a core of young people who can go out into communities and provide mental health services is, that would be something I would really hope would come out of this.
Well, my experience has been, and I think it grows more and more, is that the concept of mental health is this thing for those severely challenged people that really have significant struggles, and that's not my kid, and that's not anybody I know. It's those people over there.
Right.
And as a psychologist, I have a lot of conversations about, well, actually, it is all of us. This is our community, and you start to see, especially in younger kids, budding issues that if they were addressed when they were younger would not become full-blown issues when they're older. And especially adolescence is that time where people are really, trying to figure out who they are, but then also encountering all kinds of new things. And if we could address some of these issues then, call it mental health, call it whatever you want to call it, but do it in a very responsible and engaging way with young people, we could avert this crisis that you're talking about coming.
Right. And the other thing that I think about, first of all, mental health is, I don't know what a mental is, and I don't know how it's, like, the whole phrase is just weird to me. We're 3 clinicians, so we know. You get a kid with an anxiety, a phobia, an anxiety disorder, separation, whatever it is, with some good treatment, a little bit of CBT, acknowledging that this is an issue. That's one of the easiest fixes we have in mental health. So early intervention is critical, and why we screen for eyesight, we screen for hearing when kids go to school. We don't screen for this. And I mean, it's a frustrating part of having been on the road, sort of making this call over and over and over again, and not having systemic change around these issues. And we're going to suffer for it. And
you're fine.
In terms of what you said about, the community, one of the really disconcerting parts of researching Ready or Not was the number of people in very high positions who didn't understand that we really are a community. So I was talking to the head of AI at one of the biggest technology companies in the Valley here. And I was telling him, I use your site all the time. It's great, I'm a researcher, but so do the girls that I treat who want to cut themselves. And they go on because, as you know, you can go on and find an in real-time video of a young lady cutting herself horizontally as opposed to vertically. And I said, how do you feel about that? And his answer was, that's not my concern. So I said, well, do you have kids? And he said, yeah, I have 2 girls. And I said, but aren't you concerned about your girls? And he said, my girls would never do that. And so it's a complete lack of understanding about human beings, about teenagers, about peer culture, so it's the neighbor next door who does it. And then she comes and shows your daughter how to do it. And I think until we have a real sense, ethical sense, moral sense of we owe each other in a healthy society, that until your child matters, your child will never matter quite as much to me as my own children, but almost as much. And we're nowhere near that spot.
It's a great way to think about where we should be. I like that. So I wanted to ask you a little different question. So we're still in this, pandemic, which is causing a lot of people to do homeschooling or distance learning, or, there's various ways that we're calling that. And there's some kids that are thriving in that environment. Yes. And I wonder what are they missing, because they're more the, introvert, social phobic maybe, or I don't want to label all these, but there's some kids that are really liking this way of being in the world. Uh-huh. And that's not how the world's going to be, hopefully, in another year or two. So what do you see as some of the challenges with those youth? So
maybe the world, in terms of my saying, if education doesn't change, it'll be a waste of the pandemic. Who's doing well? We don't want to characterize them, but kids who are more introverted are having an easier time. Kids who went to school every day and got called fat or gay or, some other thing, they're saying this is a lot better for me. Kids with organizational problems who had to go from class to class, now they're in one place, they're doing better. And I think it's a real opportunity for people in education to take a look at the kids who are doing better. Why are they doing better? Well, they're not being bullied, they're not being teased, they have less distraction, and try and figure out how to provide those kinds of services for the kids who need it when they go back to school. Yes, they will have to learn to be better organized. Yes, they will have to learn how to deal with a bully, but none of us expected as many kids to say, this is just fine with me. I'm okay here in my bedroom. And, if there's one thing, it's around bullying for sure, that kids who are vulnerable for any one of a number of reasons, they're just fine in their bedroom and not being taunted the way they were when they went to school. So we got to do a better job with that.
Okay, thank you. We're going to transition, but if you are just joining us, we are in a conversation with Dr. Madeline Levine, the New York Times bestselling author of Ready or Not, Preparing Our Kids to Thrive in an Uncertain and Rapidly Changing World. If you'd like more information about Huckleberry Youth Programs, you can visit our website, huckleberryouth.org. So I'd like to turn our focus to the parents and guardians and bring Heidi from the parents and guardians to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing at Huckleberry. So I'm going to bring in Heidi Wells, our clinical director, to talk about what's happening, what we're seeing in San Francisco, and kind of get your thinking about that.
Okay. Hi, and welcome everyone. What we're seeing a lot of since we've been sheltered in place, especially, is a significant increase in mental health needs in our adolescent population. Some of this is grief and loss. We have lots of youths who have lost their prom. They're not going away to college. There's no graduation. There's also the piece of the big loss of social interactions with friends, which is huge. Adolescents not having their social circle, sports activities being diminished. We also have a lot of young people who are coming home. They've had to come home because their college campuses were closed, and this is something they were really looking forward to. And so that's translating into a huge increase in, anxiety, depression, acting out behaviors, some of the things you touched on earlier, Madeline, even as far as cutting and some other behaviors along those lines. Along with this, we now have lots of stressed out parents. We have parents who not only have maybe 16 and 17-year-olds at home, but they've also got 11, 10, and 9 at home. And they are now at home and they've become teachers for their kids. So where they were able to switch hats in the past and maybe they had a work life and a home life, now that's blurred. They're working parents who are also home all day with their kids. So we've got kids acting out at home. They're frustrated. It's hard to sit at a table all day or a computer all day. And I love that you mentioned the families without resources who are now trying to homeschool maybe from their aunt's house or from somebody else's house that they're getting dropped off at. And so We've got parents, they're now doing things they've never had to do before. They're teaching, they have to adapt curriculum, they have to be the home tech support in their house, and maybe that's something they're not good at. Something we also touched on before was the psychological and financial stress that is increasing frustration and parents' ability to just be patient. Parents are often resorting to parenting in ways that they normally would not. So how do parents thrive in these current conditions, given what you shared in your book? I like some of the things you mentioned earlier, but what are your thoughts on that?
I'm smiling because it's so friggin' hard. You know, it's kind of like
So hard.
Parents are being,
Exactly.
it's why I had to throw in the leadership thing, because parents are being asked to be physicians and immunologists and teachers and school administrators and all the things we have not trained to be. We've been trained to like try and raise good kids, nice kids, kind kids, right? Motivated, engaged kids. And all of a sudden we have 10 different jobs. And so I have to start by saying it's really, really difficult. And I'm not, excuse me, I'm not going to have a silver bullet. I'm going to have some suggestions, but I want everybody who's listening to this to hear it through a particular lens. That's a mixed metaphor, lens. Anyway, to hear it through your values and through your family. Everybody is different. Every family is different. Every kid is different. We just talked about there are some kids, they're doing fine. And there are some kids who are just totally losing it, right? So when you listen to an expert, remember that we look at large groups of people. And so what we say is generally good, especially if it's well researched, but it may or may not be exactly right for your family. So in the very beginning, right, didn't they tell us all like we needed a hobby, right? So I decided I was going to play the piano, and then I was going to clean out my closets, and then I was going to arrange my books and take away all the stickies that tell me, you know, clinical, child, adolescent. None of it. I've done none of it. I haven't even been near the piano, and there's stickies still all over my office. So did that work for me? Apparently not. So I think what you have to do is, I'll give some ideas about what I think are helpful, and then you have to run that through the reality of what interests you in your own life. So I start by saying it's really hard. That's a given. And people are going to have to sit with how difficult this is. And we know, I was talking to various people about, you know, it looks like rates of abuse are going down, child abuse are going down, and violence are going down. And they're not at all. It's just that the people who reported on those things are not available to us anymore. So we have 100 different roles we're not trained for. So we're in roles we don't know anything about in a time of stress with very few protective things around us. It's not going to get any more difficult than that. And every family's different. So I have what you will either see as a very high bar or a very low bar. My bar for this time is to get your family through reasonably intact, and whatever that takes. Do they need structure and discipline? Yes. Do they need exercise and good food? Yes. Do they need, you know, everybody who's listening, I'm sure, has heard, you know, the mantra of make sure you get exercise and breathe and do some meditation and eat well and get a good night's sleep. I think everybody knows that stuff already. But I think what's really important is that you get through somehow. So if your kid, you know, in the beginning, I was getting calls all the time, like, school starts in the house at 8:30, but my teenage daughter won't get up till 8:30 and she's not at the computer till 9. And I say, school just started at 9 o'clock. I mean, it's like, what hill do you want to die on in this? Do you want an explosion in your house around a half hour of time, or an extra half, you know? There will be questions about screen time on every talk I give. There's questions about screen time. You got to decide, do you want to die on the hill of an extra 40 minutes of screen time or not? So, you know, my biggest comment is, whatever you know about your family that will help you get through this time, try and enact it. Yes, you need structure and discipline and all those things, but you also need structured flexibility, something like that. Yeah, structured, flexible, well, flexible structure, that's better. Flexible structure is better. So that's one of the things I think is really important. I think it's really important to focus on the relationships. You have dust balls under your bed, who cares? You're trying to develop relationships. Look, the best part about the pandemic is we're home. We're spending a lot of time with family members. We're really getting to know each other. And the worst part of the pandemic is we're home. We're spending a lot of time together, and we're really getting to know each other. And that has, you know, it's the best of times and the worst of times. Yeah. So you got to give people, I had to stop giving my husband a hard time because he doesn't know how to do a laundry. He's like 70 years old. He doesn't know how to turn on the laundry. Okay, you know, I'm not going to get worked up about that. And the other thing I think is helpful is you got to do something for somebody besides yourself. It adds, one, the world needs it. We need people out there doing something good. And two, it's a great opportunity to stop, pause, reset, figure out what your values really are. What story do you want to tell your children after this, and your grandchildren? And what story do they want to tell? What worked during this time? What was great during this time? What sucked during this time? You know, get a family narrative on what the pandemic has meant to your particular family. So those are, and then eat well, breathe well, sleep well, all those things help.
I love that. And I love thinking about the stop and thinking and pausing, you know, and thinking about how this story is going to turn out for your family. I had been thinking about, you know, thinking about how parents are stressed and overwhelmed at home. And parents are often asking us, you know, for what can I do with my kids, you know, because it's not like there's programs. And as to what you were talking about earlier, if you have resources, you can have your kid in all kind of activities, even during COVID. They're taking online guitar lessons. They're going to all sorts of ceramic classes online and stuff. But I'm also thinking about the families that don't have those resources and opportunities. And so that's where the increased frustration comes in with, what do I do with my kids? Mm-hmm. So I do like the idea of getting in service and having the kids maybe do something. If the parents have, you know, if they have the bandwidth to sort of get them out there, because it seems like for many parents, you know, the teens are coming to Huckleberry, but it's very apparent that the parents need support. Also, they need a lot of support emotionally to, as you say, get your family through this.
Right.
I think there's some days that feel like we've got it. I got it.
Right.
And there's some days where we're like, I can't do this.
Right.
And so,
and you
find a balance.
You wouldn't expect anything else. And I think one of the things this has taught us to do, hopefully, is to live with a degree of uncertainty. So I wrote this book all about uncertainty, like trying to control it. And this makes it abundantly clear that we never had the kind of control we thought we had before. Now everybody's running around, it's uncertain and we can't control it. And gee, I think if you don't sit back and realize you never had that kind of, people die, there are accidents, there's all kinds of things. So there's this pervasive sense of uncertainty. And I think for parents and kids alike, it's kind of like being thrown in the deep end of the pool with no swimming lessons. I mean, I think the way we learn to tolerate uncertainty is in small doses, right? I was thinking, my last talk, I think I was at Berks or Hamlin's, and I just kind of asked people how many people had never had their heart broken. And 500 people are there, one person raises their hand. One woman didn't have her heart broken. There's more to the story, but I didn't find out what it was. And I thought a lot about that. So there's 499 of us, including myself, who've had our heart broken, but we're all sitting there. We've grown up, we have kids, we're listening to parent education. How did that happen? And I think that it happens because we have these incrementally challenges in life. So you didn't get invited to the popular girls' party. And unfortunately, in my clientele, often what the mom would do is just go out and make a bigger party. So the kids from the popular party would come. That's a terrible solution. You live with the fact that you weren't invited to the popular kids party. You live with the fact that the boy you liked didn't invite you to the prom. You live with the fact that your #1 school didn't happen for you. And you build up a kind of tolerance for challenge in life, which is a very important thing to do. And I think what this has done, particularly for kids who haven't had enough time to build that muscle up, like I said, it's being thrown in all at once, you know, without those wings like that kids wear. What the wings, is that what they call?
Yeah, the water wings that they were, yes.
Yes, to continue with my analogy. And I think that is incredibly difficult for all of us. And I actually think that part of the solution to that is to understand that we're sitting with uncertainty and you can't fix it right now. And so before in Ready or Not, I talk a lot about what I call accumulated disability, that parents were having a very hard time allowing their kids to be challenged. They wanted them challenged in school, but, you know, the dog scares me. Oh, don't worry, honey, we'll drive around the block so you don't have to see the dog. Or I can't sleep at my friend's house. Don't worry, we'll come get you before, you know, that kind of thing. My favorite one was the girl who didn't like sauce, S-A-U-C-E, like sauce on her food. And the parents called whenever she went somewhere, called ahead and said, don't serve my daughter sauce. She doesn't like it. But she wasn't allergic or anything. That kind of over-involved attempts at controlling challenge, I think are very, very dangerous. These are the kids that I see over and over come home from college. They don't like their roommate. They don't like the food. You know, there was a mouse in the room. They have no ability to feel that they can make it through challenge. And I think one of the things that I would really love to see come out of this is a change from saying to your kid all the time, don't worry, honey. And it's in my office, it's like, don't worry, honey, to something like, I think you can do that. You can handle that. You've got that. And I think there's never been a time where we need to say to our kids, I think you can handle that. And there are days that they can't, there are days that we can. But I would like to see that switch from being overly protective, which leads, you know, what happens when you accommodate to anxiety, right? For the moment, it feels better, but long-term, it cultivates an anxiety disorder. And I have an incredibly unpopular point of view, but hey, this is whatever. I love your organization. And my point of view is that a lot of the trigger warnings and those kinds of things, two of my boys are lawyers and they had a lot of trigger warnings in school. It's exactly the opposite of what we do in the office. You know, in the office, if you're upset by something, we slowly desensitize you to it. And I think this idea of pulling kids out of things that are challenging works against the development of resilience.
Okay, I like that.
Not, a lot of people don't, but thank you.
So Madeline, we have numerous questions and from people viewing and some that were sent in. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, unfortunately. But one of the questions, and I'll paraphrase this one a little bit, is some people think of challenge as being there's an optimal range. So there's if it's not challenging enough, it's boring. But if it's too challenging, that people won't attempt it. But I would say in this era, if it's too challenging, sometimes there's dire consequences. I mean, people literally are dying of COVID. People are in very, very situations, or they're seeing others. And so, is the anxiety, I was going to say, is the anxiety real? But of course the anxiety is real, but is it, yeah, how do we like figure out, like, there's that optimal range? Like right now, there's so much that's creating anxiety that's above and beyond the dog walking down the streets, the triggers that would happen in school. If a young kid tests positive for COVID, that's a scary thing.
Right. So, what you're talking about reminds me of what we call the ZPD, the Zone of Proximal Development in Education. Like, don't make it too easy because it's boring. Don't make it too hard because the person feels they can't be competent with it. I think that zone is bigger now. I think we can't afford to say, well, that's really too scary for you. I think we have to learn how to talk to kids at different ages. One of the things that's striking to me, just clinically, is how parents don't have a great sense of where their child is developmentally. So my favorite example is this mom who thinks she's being funny. The boy says, we're on Zoom, the boy says, can I invite my friend when this ends? Can we put Jason on the calendar? And the mom says, well, we could put Jason on the calendar, but I'm going to put it in pencil because who knows if the world's going to end or not. Now, if she was sitting eyeball to eyeball with me, like, that might be funny. But to a 7-8-year-old who has no sense of what irony is, it's not funny at all. It's terrifying. And so I think we need to talk less to younger kids. No long conversations that grandma has COPD and, if you go outside, she's going to die. Quick, easy for young kids. And older kids, older kids always want to be listened to. I mean, you both devote your life to teenagers. Have you ever had a teenager come into your office? We probably have 100 years between us, and say, my parents, they just listen too much.
No.
No.
No, never.
Never. It's always they don't listen enough. So I think we have to do that. And I think when it comes to issues of real safety, we do have to draw tough lines with our kids. And in the beginning, this was really hard. Like, if you don't abide by this, if it was a real danger, you can't come home. And again, for people with resources here, they have a cottage out back, or they have the second home, and so the kid quarantines. But in most families, that's not a possibility. And so, it's safety first, and then getting through this intact second. That's my list.
Okay, so we have a question about cyberbullying, online bullying, and is that worse than or more challenging now that that's the only type of engagement and social activity many people are having? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I realized when I was talking about the kid who's not being bullied, I did not reference the fact that, yes, excuse me. I think the research is that cyberbullying actually has more negative effects than in-person bullying, because you don't have a target to respond to, or, it's not eyeball to eyeball, and it's anonymous, and people have less inhibition on their aggression when they're typing it anonymously. So I think it's a big issue. I really don't know the research on whether or not cyberbullying is up during this period of time. My best guess would be it is, because kids are bored, and it brings up for me like a difficult decision for parents. And that is, if your kid is being abused in some way, whether it's bullying or whatever it is, you do have to intervene when kids have so little supportive people around them. So they can't go to the counselor and they can't go to the teacher. And it makes me feel, I have to think about this, but it makes me feel like I want to say, you should have a little more oversight on your kids' computer time. If you have any suspicion, because bullied kids generally don't tell you that they're being bullied. Abused kids generally don't tell you if they're being abused. And so I can remember with my own kids, there was a period of time where I was watching out for one of my kids, and it was like, you know what? I mean, this sounds dumb now, but it's like, I bought that computer. I love you. I'm just checking that you're okay. And, you know, once you know it's out of love and protection, I think you're usually allowed to keep an eye out. I'd keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
So this next question, along the same lines of electronics and mental health, and we've talked a little bit about this, but that struggling for that balance between the right amount of time and knowing that many people are needing to spend more time online. Many young people are because of school and that. And some of those kids that are really struggling with it, normally happy kids are really having a hard time without the social engagement that
Right.
that used to happen.
Right.
And so happy kids are becoming sad very quickly.
Right.
And we've talked a little bit about this, but specifically around like balancing that electronics time and that school time versus other activities. What's your thoughts around that?
You know, it's interesting that that question always gets phrased like screen time in one way or another. And I think it's important to recognize that screen time encompasses so many different activities, some pretty negative, some very positive. So, you know, 15 years of being asked how much screen time is okay for a kid. And it's like, it depends on what the kid's doing on the screen. And it depends on what else is being crowded out by the time on the screen. So usually the answer is something like, well, as long as your kids have friends and is doing well in school and is getting out and playing a sport, I'm not that worried about screen time. But those things aren't available in the same way. So there's doom scrolling, you know, just like over and over looking at every scary headline. And we know from research that kids who, all of us, by the way, who pay more attention to the media disproportionately think that the world is dangerous, called mean world syndrome. So I'm encouraging everybody not to spend hours at a time online. Even though it is seductive and compelling, you will feel worse about the world, and so will your kids. So try not to do that. My middle kid's a director in New York now. He spent a lot of time online making films, and you know, there was a whole creative part of being online versus the kid whose time was entirely spent with Madden, doing some NFL or whatever it was. And this is the only way many kids have of having contact. Now, you know, I'm curious what you guys think. If kids are 6 feet apart, if they can maintain those distances, if they're masked, if they're outside in a small group, it's my understanding that that's safe. Keeping kids at 6 feet apart with a mask on is not always easy. And that's the deal you may have to make with kids is, you know, my own kids have been over here. We get COVID tested, we're 6 feet apart, we wear our mask. My kids are, you know, all millennials, so they're thoughtful about this kind of thing. But I think there are ways that kids can have some contact with each other, take a hike with each other, have a picnic around my neighborhood all the time with each other. But it means trust, having enough trust that your kid will abide by the rules and that there are consequences if they don't.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask, I think we have time, maybe 1 or 2 more questions, but here's one more. Can you talk about teens who are engaging in risky behaviors during this time due to boredom or what other things? And what are some things that we can do with people that are increasing their risk during this time?
Right. So, you know, often I'll be asked a question about how do you know when your kid's in trouble? Or how do you know when it's an anxiety disorder? Or how do you know when it's depression? Or how do you know when it's too risky? So I'm going to answer all of those together. You're looking for changes, right? So if your kid has always been kind of like around the screen time, if your kid's always been reasonably happy and all of a sudden for not a day or two, but a week or two or three is teary and in bed, or you're finding drugs, or they're sneaking out their window at night, if that's a change from their usual coping, be alert to that. You know, for clinical diagnosis, we always use intensity and the period of time and change in behavior. So I think that's right. If your kid's always been a poor risk taker, that I think that's different than the kid who is bored and is testing the boundaries right now. For the kid who's, you know, testing the boundaries right now, I think structure is part of the answer for that. You cannot, I mean, parents have an allergy, in my experience, and I have a lot. You said 40 years, it's like I'm 100 years old. Parents have an allergy to saying, because I said so. You know, we all have, like, my parents said because I said so, and I'm never going to do that. I think it's a time when parents have to say, absolutely not. That's not negotiable. And we're aware of it. I'm just thinking about something. When my kids learned how to drive, which were the most terrifying months of my life, right? They did not get to go to Tahoe the first week they knew how to drive. It was like, no, you can't do that. Here's what you have to do to get to Tahoe. You have to drive around the corner, around the neighborhood, across the Golden Gate Bridge, you know, and a year later you can maybe drive to Tahoe. And that kind of no, I think parents need to put that back in their language. And I'm aware that I just finished saying, you know, you have to collaborate with your teenager and it should be the two of you coming up with rules. But when it comes to risk-taking, bad risk-taking, in the same way, when it wasn't COVID and I'd have a kid who was driving drunk with 4 other kids in the car, you know, just an absolute setup for a disaster, it was no. And I think we're facing those kinds of threats to health and safety now. I think we have to learn how to say no. That's the tough mom part of me. That's when you raise 3 boys. You
become a tough mom with 3 boys.
Right.
So this, I think, should probably be our final question. Unfortunately, we're coming kind of to the close of the hour with you. But one person said, I feel like the world's biggest test of tolerating uncertainty is for both parents and kids. So how do we teach our kids to tolerate uncertainty? And ultimately build up their muscles. It's kind of what we've been talking about, yeah. But I think it's a nice capstone to end. You talk about structured flexibility. You know, I think of creativity being structure around and internally flexible. So maybe you could just close on this concept of.
Yeah, one thing I want to say before I close,
sure.
I'll say after I answer this. I think what I said earlier about you can do this is a really critical part of helping kids develop the resilience. So, you know, if you go in and act as if the world's falling apart, which it feels like some days, and your kid can't possibly manage in it, your kid will lower themselves to that level. I can't manage. I think it's really important to get the message out, because if I listen to kids, the world's over. Everybody's going to die. What difference does it make if I go out, right? Because, you know, they sort of fond of hyperbole. To help them understand that the world's not over, that they have a role in making it a better world, that we believe in their capacity to get through this. The parents that I hear doing a good job are really driving that home. Yeah, we're going to make it through. It's really tough. We will make it through this. And again, I think it really helps when you see your parents doing service. I'm big on that right now, as a way of coping with all of this. because it helps other people, and it makes the point more than all the conversations in the world about. It's really important to help other people. To Kun alum in my group, it makes it real, and kids learn from watching you. So, you know, you in the beginning, Heidi and I were kidding around about breathing together. Like, that stuff matters. I have one family, they do this great thing at night because they're all anxious. So they all, 15 minutes before they go to bed, have a meditation and breathing session, and they're doing a lot better. I mean, like, big clinical intervention, right? But those things, I think, are incredibly helpful. I know you said that's our last question, so I want to end by saying I have the greatest respect for the work that the two of you do and your organization does. And I knew you guys back when you, Heidi, probably, I'm not sure you were born, from 9 Grove Lane in Marin, which was where I used to send a lot of kids. So desperate need for the services that you provide. And to those people who are watching, this is an organization that has served our most vulnerable kids since the 60s, right?
Yeah. Yes, 50 plus years.
Yeah, 50 plus years. And they have always been there when other organizations have not been there. So be a supporter. They do great work. I have huge admiration for what you do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. We could, I could talk about this topic forever. It sounds like you, Madeline, and Heidi as well. We should set up another time to sit down and have more conversation around this. So I just wanted to remind people that we are recording this. If you missed any portion of this conversation, we will post it on our website. And if you are curious more about Madeline Levine's work, purchase her books. She's also speaking all over the place, so find out where those are and follow up. A couple things that I want to talk just briefly about Huckleberry. If you're curious about parenting skills, consider joining Huckleberry's Parents' Turn, which is a free 6-week parenting skill building and support workshop. And we're moving to a virtual session because of COVID, and the next one starts September 23rd. That information's on our website. But again, just a huge thank you to Madeline for sharing your time, your experience, and your ideas with us. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And Heidi, also want to thank you for joining in this conversation. And behind the scenes, we have Heather Matthews working with us. So thank you to both of you. And finally, just a huge thank you to everybody for joining us this evening, taking time out of your day to participate in this conversation. As I said, if you'd like more information, don't hesitate to stop by our website, huckleberryouth.org. Please support our work. This is how we do what we do, is through support in the community. All the people that registered for this event will receive a follow-up email with more information. And then finally, I'm going to plug our first virtual fundraiser later this fall, Rise Up for Youth and Family Rights. This will be on Thursday, November 12th. So we hope to see all of you there. So again, thank you for joining us. Stay safe, wash your hands, be kind to your kids, hug your kids, find time to play, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.